Hello, everybody. This is episode 20 of Hello Again with me, Isabelle Broom, and today I'm joined by the amazing Nydia Hetherington, who wrote the novel A Girl Made of Air, which I think is just the most goosebump-inducing, beautiful novel title. One of my very, very favourites. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. It's fantastic.
You and David Bowie, we can just see behind you. Love a bit of Bowie, isn't he great? Do you want to start by just telling us a little bit about you and a little bit about A Girl Made of Air?
Okie doke. Well, my name is Nydia Hetherington, and A Girl Made of Air, which is right here. I'll show it to you.
Look at that. Wow.
Lovely, beautiful gold leaf. Oh,
gorgeous.
So this is my first novel, my debut novel. I started writing it about 2012. I think I started writing it. So it's been a long old jog, and it's about a funambulist born into a post-war circus. So a funambulist is a tightrope walker.
Great word.
So she's born into a flea pit circus. She's rejected immediately by her mother and the person she thinks is her father, and she grows up as a feral child in this flea pit circus, this traveling circus. Eventually she is taken under the wing of a magical person called Serendipity Wilson, who she sees as a magical person. She has glowing orange hair. She's like a beacon of light into her life. And she is the circus funambulist. So she teaches this child to be a tightrope walker.
Amazing.
Lots of bad things happen to her. Her life goes on. She leaves the circus and she becomes a star of the cabaret scene in America, in Coney Island, in New York. So that's the basic premise of the basic narrative. But underneath all this, she tells lots of stories. She is telling her stories as an older person by transcribing her diaries and putting down her memories, looking at photographs and letters, and telling us all about her life. The book is peppered with folk tales from the Isle of Man. Serendipity Wilson, this beacon-haired magical character, is from the Isle of Man, and she tells lots of original Manx folk stories, which I've kind of retold in her voice all the way through the book, which are kind of lessons for this young girl growing up. So the book is actually about telling stories. It's about how we receive stories and the histories of our families and friends, so the traumas and sufferings of the people who've gone before, specifically women, really. So it's about women and stories, how we receive those stories, how we process those stories, and in turn, how we pass them on and how we pass on our own stories. So it's a book about storytelling.
Stories within a story.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know you were, am I right in thinking you were born in the Isle of Man?
No, I lived there as a very small child. So I was born just outside Liverpool, but then my family moved to the Isle of Man when I was a baby, so a tiny baby. And then we lived there until I think I must have been about 5 when we left the island, and then we moved to Leeds, of all places. Lovely Leeds. I love Leeds.
Yeah.
But a very different place, and that's where I grew up. So my first ever memories are of the Isle of Man, and it's a very specific kind of landscape. I think the landscape's very much like the west of Ireland. It's very green, it's very misty, it's very wet. There's lots of heather and gorse, and I grew up with the idea of the Manx Fairies as well. So as a child, I was obsessed with these fairies, and they're not the beautiful little fairies like Tinkerbell with wings. They're mischievous little men.
Oh wow.
And they're very mischievous, and they wear like red coats and green hats, and they do all kinds of mischievous things if you don't do what the fairies want you to do. So there's a bridge on the Isle of Man called Fairy Bridge, and that's where the fairies live. They live under the bridge. And as you go over the bridge, even today on a bus, there's an announcement that says, we're just going over Fairy Bridge now, if you'd all like to say hello to the little people. So you have to say hello to little people as you go over the bridge, because if you don't, something terrible will happen to you. You have to acknowledgement. So as a little girl, I used to say Evi von Eveg to the little people, which is Manx for good day, little people.
Oh wow.
So you see like lorry drivers and people on their cars just driving, and they'll just go as they go over the bridge in their car.
That's incredible. It's such a sort of, it's obviously had a massive impact on you from that sort of young age, and you've carried it with you. I love that.
I was obsessed by the fairies when I was a kid. I think because I left the Isle of Man when I was like 5, so I had these extremely strong memories of the island. And I remember moving, and I remember being in this big moving van, and I remember going along motorways and things off the ferry. And I said to my mum, oh, it's okay, because I've brought a fairy with me, so we'll be all right. You know, but I had no idea what life was going to be like, not living by the sea and not, you know, not living with the fairies.
A big change as well, to go from somewhere like that into the middle of England, you know.
Yeah. And we lived just by the factory that my dad worked at a factory, and we literally lived on the factory site.
Wow.
For a while, yeah. So yeah, a bit strange.
But you've also lived in Paris.
Well, that was much later. So I went to Paris in 2000, and I came back in 2009. So I spent like a decade in Paris.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was
incredible.
Well, that was I went there to train in physical theatre at the Jacques Lecoq School, which is a very well known physical theatre school in that world, in the world of theatre. And when I finished there, I just stayed. I ended up buying a small flat, and I stayed, and I did theatre there for a good few years. Yeah.
Paris is great as well, because it's so well connected to the UK that really it's the same as sort of living in London, Leeds, isn't it? You can get there in just the same amount of time.
Yeah,
crazy.
2 hours on the train, 2 hours 15 minutes, I think it is. I mean, it's so quick. Yeah.
So what was it that made you want to tell a story about a funambulist, which is not my new favourite word of the month, I think? Did the character, I mean, we never find out the name of the character, but she's sort of known as Mouse by some of the other characters. Does she come into your, sort of strut into your mind fully formed, as they say, like Harry Potter style, or was it more the circus setting and then she came from the setting?
So it's more the circus setting to start with. I had the idea of a tightrope walker just because I think aesthetically it's such a beautiful image, you know. And of course you also have the metaphor of life is a tightrope, you know, you've got to balance everything out, you know, so that was all there. I mean, the circus aesthetic for me has always been really vivid. So I was in theatre for many years, but I wasn't really interested in just being an actor and just your basic traditional theatre. I was much more interested in physical theatre and clowning, and so that whole circus aesthetic is part of that world. And especially in mainland Europe, much more so in Britain, we don't have it as much here, where traditional theatre is a very sort of specific thing, whereas the lines of spectacle in mainland Europe are very much blurred, and so you get lots of people who kind of mix circus and theatre and those different aesthetics together. So it was a very vivid image for me anyway, and something I'd loved for many years. Like my favourite film of all time is La Strada by Frederick Fellini. If you haven't seen it, you must see it. It is so beautiful. It's about a little travelling troupe of players, a strong man and his assistant, and it's just beautiful. So that aesthetic was with me, and I really wanted to put that into my first attempt at writing a novel. And then you had the Manx thing and the folk tales, which I always wanted to kind of write about as well.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, maybe I can marry these two things together. It's going to be a bit difficult, but I'll try really hard to sew it all together. And Mouse, which I never really call her Mouse, I always call her the narrator.
Yeah.
The narrator's voice just came out of, who's going to tell this story? You know, whose story is it and who's going to tell it? So she developed over time. She didn't come fully formed at all. She developed over time.
Oh yeah, I think that's how it happens with most. I mean, you do hear about these characters striding in fully formed, but I'm always thinking how, like, because it takes such a long time. I think it's the same as a friendship for me. You have to spend time with your characters, don't you? And the only way to spend time with them is to write them, and sometimes that can be over and over and over for years and years and years until you know them well enough. Yeah, but it is a fascinating process, and there's a lot of light and sort of hope in the novel, but there's also quite a lot of darkness, and as you said before, lots of bad things befall this character. And I wonder how sort of difficult you found those to write. Did you find that your mood was kind of affected by what you were writing ever? Because I know when I've written in the past, I've written sort of really bleak scenes where people are going through hard stuff. I do struggle, and I have a bit of a like, ooh. But it's good. It feels cathartic at the same time.
Yeah. So yes, I did struggle, and there's one specific chapter. I'm no spoilers, so I'm not going to really talk too much about it. But I had to do a lot of research for it, and I researched people's lives, like people's real lives and their real stories, to be able to do justice to the darkness that indeed befell so many people. So this is to do with this is to do with the war, because this is the book starts just at the end of the Second World War. So obviously there's a lot of darkness there to be found, and it took me months to write. It took me months and months to write that one particular chapter, and yeah, I spent a lot of time crying. I spent a lot of time not sleeping, and I spent a lot of time crying, and because I watched videos which were shot, I think, in the 1980s. So lots of people who were young people during World War II. And they still weren't like super old in the late 1970s, early 1980s, when these videos of them were taken, and they were just talking about their different experiences, and it was just, heartbreaking is not even the word, because it was just it was harrowing. So yeah, really hard, really hard. And I don't shy away from darkness, because, the world is full of it. We're certainly going through a period in time at the moment. It's obviously, it's very, very different. I'm not going to compare it to war, and I really hate those analogies that just keep
that we're in battle. Yeah,
this is not a war. It's very, very different. But it's a dark, bleak time, and I just think you have to acknowledge the darkness, number one, to do justice to the humans who go through it, and number two, to appreciate the light.
Yeah, exactly, like two sides of the coin, and that is life, isn't it? And I think quite often, unfortunately, you have to go through darkness to really appreciate what's on the other side, and appreciate how important it is to keep reaching for it, because you can get so easily swallowed up by darkness, can't you?
Exactly. I had a friend who suffered really bad depression for many years, and she used to say to me that she wouldn't change the way her mind works, although it was very hard for her, because she said she sees all the colors.
Gosh.
And that's stayed with me. Well, forever. It will always stay with me. She sees all the colors, and I just think that that's what life is. It's all the colors, and some of us perhaps don't see them all, and perhaps that's a good thing. I don't know, but they're there.
Yeah, I don't know whether to envy those people or You know, because sometimes people can be perpetually, or seem like they're perpetually buoyant and positive and cheerful, but quite often that can be a charade in itself, can't it? That can be a sign that something perhaps isn't quite right. But that's why it's so great writing novels, I think, because you get to really dig deep into people's psyche and how things will affect different people, and think about how they've affected you. I mean, I don't know about you, but writing for me, sometimes I start off with a sort of issue, and I find out that I know things that I didn't realize I knew, if that makes sense. I end up teaching myself a lesson through the process of writing about it. Perhaps easier to do it through a character than it is to do it through therapy yourself, maybe. I don't know.
I think that's very true about teaching. I mean, I've certainly written stuff and read it back, and I just thought, oh,
Yeah.
oh, all right, yeah, definitely something's clicked, you know. So I agree with that completely.
I think it makes sense because writing is a creative outlet in the same way that a lot of people do it through painting, or would do it through acting maybe, or talking, or whatever it might be. I think even ever since I was a child, writing was always the thing I did if I wanted to make sense of something. It would be to write it, or to try and think of it visually, to try and I'm a big lover of metaphors. I probably have too many. My editor's always like, I think you've gone one metaphor too far on this page, because it's like this, like this, like this. But I love seeing the world in that way and thinking of it as objects and colours and sea, and like you said about a tightrope being a sort of a metaphor for life, and having that balance, being able to kind of keep everything going and staying balanced. Very easy to topple. I like that.
I think what you say is really interesting as well, about making sense of the world, because I mean, I think that the way I write very serious human stories, but they come from a place of fairy tale, and they come from a place of fable, and perhaps a place of fantasy to a certain extent, but only to a small extent. But these places are important because fairy tale and folk stories and myth were told for a reason, and they were told to make sense of this world that we live in, you know. And I get a little bit frustrated with people that go, oh no, I can't read a book that has a talking dog in it, you know. And it's like, well, why? you know, it doesn't mean it's not a deeply human book with deeply human, you know, thought processes and images and tropes and issues. So I mean, that's what, like I say, that's what fairy tale and folk tales were all about. They were all about making sense of our human world.
Yeah, and turning them into something that could be retold and explained for people that didn't want to have those more serious conversations. It's the same as nursery rhymes, isn't it? When you pick apart those and work out what they really mean, it can be quite like, oh, okay, you know, Ring a Ring of Roses, for example. You just think that's actually really macabre. It's a way of making something horrific sort of, I don't know, like less scary for kids, maybe. I don't know.
Just a way of making sense of it, I think. I mean, that's what you said earlier, and I think you've hit the nail on the head completely. A way of making sense of what's going around. And for example, Serendipity Wilson in my book, I mean, the reader can interpret her any way that they wish, and you know, in every way that they wish. In fact, please do.
Yeah.
You know, but did she really have a head of shining, you know, bright orange hair, or is that just the way she came across to this person who was, you know, deeply damaged? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I often get actually messages from readers who have interpreted my characters in a completely different way to how I kind of think of them in my mind. And I always hold back on doing too much detailed description, because I think I like to give people a sense, but not a detail. Because especially with romantic heroes, when you're writing a romantic hero, you want people to fancy them. So you just give them the bare bones and then let everybody else fill the gaps in. That's why I don't write love scenes, because I'm like, I'll ruin it I'll ruin it for everyone if I try to put anything in there.
Oh, but they're also excruciating to
They are.
right. You just sit there going, oh God.
I know. It's just not where my talent lies, sadly. Occasionally, the odd one will slip in, but yeah, not too bad. I'm no E.L. James, that's for sure.
Oh, God.
Yeah. Can you tell us anything about your second novel, what you're working on at the moment?
So I'm working on a book which is based in London, actually, based in Peckham, of all places.
Nice.
And I'm not quite sure where I'm going with it. I'm just over halfway through and I'm still not sure I'm going with it, but that's okay. That's
it's the first draft, it's fine.
It's the first draft, and it's basically set in 1999, just at the turn of the millennium.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about a young girl who is about to turn 20 at midnight, and her auntie who's about to turn 50 at midnight on the year 2000. It's also got angels in it, and there is something growing under Peckham Rye.
Wow.
Some kind of malevolent force that we don't really know what it is. It's kind of like a modern Gothic.
Oh, I like that.
I think, and it's based on
great sell, great hook, modern Gothic. Love it.
I think so. I think that's what it's going to be. It needs a lot of work and a lot of tightening and a lot of finishing. But it's based on the idea that William Blake, when he was 5 years old, he went for a walk. Strangely, because he lived in Soho, and he went for a walk on his own when he was 5 years old.
Gosh.
And found himself in Peckham.
That's a long walk.
Walk for a 5-year-old, but there you go. And it was all farms there. So Peckham Rye was part of a farm, and there was a big oak tree on Peckham Rye, and William Blake saw angels in the oak tree, and it was his first vision. So if you go to Peckham, there are several sort of mentions of the angels and William Blake. You'll spot them around, these little mentions, and so it comes from there. So the narrator of the book is a kind of poet figure, who's like an all-seeing poet figure. We'll have to see where I go with that. It's still really early days, so I'm enjoying the characters, and I'm enjoying their adventures. And
it's so nice as well to have that foundation of truth, in the same way that you had the folklore with the first novel, because I think it's a great access point for readers to come in, and it's a great, when you're talking about the novel and doing all the publicity, it's a great way in as well to kind of be like, you can build on that and create a story from a story again. No, it's really exciting.
Yeah, I plus I'm a massive William Blake fan, so I'm a bit of a sort of William Blake fangirl. So it's just really nice. I think when you're writing, it's just so nice to bring in the elements of things that really fire you up.
Yeah.
Like with my first novel, it was like the circus, and it was Manx mythology and Manx folklore. And with this one, it's sort of a bit more gothic, which of course I love. It's got William Blake's ideas in there. Yeah. It's got a bit of angels and ghosts and all those lovely things.
We've reached the quick fire round, and there is actually a question in here about ghosts, but I could ask you that if you like, rather than pulling it out. It's just, do you believe in ghosts? And if so, why?
The answer is no.
You don't? I thought you were going to have an amazing story then about a ghost encounter. No,
I believe that people project lots of things because they have a need to, and I believe that it's a deep psychological need to be able to touch what we've lost.
Yeah.
When I was writing A Girl Made of Air, sadly I lost a few people during that time. And so I wrote it through grief, and I really thought about this idea about ghosts and spirits, and it really is a way to console ourselves, for me anyway. I don't want to say any, you know, I don't want to poo-poo anybody else's beliefs. You believe whatever gets you through, you know. But for me, this idea that oh, they're waiting for me on the other side, I find it almost heartbreaking, because, you know, for me, they're not, they're gone, because life is short and we are humans and this is what we've got, and we have to make the most of it. And that actually gives me more comfort than you know, projecting this kind of mystical idea, although I love mystical ideas, you know, but I don't believe in them.
I remember when I was at university, we had to do a radio project, and we decided to do it about spiritualism. So we went to see a spiritualist. We went to a spiritualist church, and then we went to visit her in her home. And she kind of talked about a lot of stuff, and was saying to my friend, you know, your grand's here. She wants to talk to you about this, that, the other. And my friend fully believed it, and I was very skeptical. And then we went to speak to just a normal vicar in a standard, you know, church, and he said, it's not that I don't believe, he said, but I don't believe in giving people false hope, and grief is so difficult anyway that people will believe anything, any kind of message when they're grieving, and I don't think that that is a good idea. People have to move on with their lives. And I thought, he's hit the nail on the head there, hasn't he? It was very wise. He wasn't, like you say, he wasn't saying those things don't exist, but he was like, they don't help you move on with your life. You have to live in the present moment.
I think belief systems, any belief system, whether it be a religion or a philosophy or whatever it is that people want to live by and people believe in, you know, these belief systems, again, like we were talking about fairy stories earlier, are a way for us to make sense of the world around us and make sense of this very confusing thing, which is human existence. I mean, it's all, I mean, without getting too heavy, it's a crazy thing, you know, consciousness and all this, and the fact that we just exist for these years, and then you're gone, and then there's a history, and it's a crazy thing. So of course people have belief systems and they need to, but ghosts, I don't really believe in them, no. I love the idea of them, and I love ghost stories.
Oh, so do I. Although I can't watch them on my own. I'm such a wimp. I haven't watched anything scary in lockdown because I'm... Oh, that's so weird. It was the question that I pulled out. See, now I do believe.
Now I do believe. There you go. Maybe there's something at work.
Someone's having a joke with us. Okay. Okay. What would be your dream holiday destination post-lockdown, obviously?
Gosh. Oh, that's so hard. There are so many.
There are.
So maybe Mexico.
Oh yeah.
I'd love to go to Mexico just to experience the kind of vividness again of this kind. They've got a very vivid national character.
Yes, that's true.
You know, and I'd love to experience that. Maybe again for the same reasons, Japan and China. You know, all these places which have very vivid national characters, which are so very different from my own experience. So any of those places, or just in the middle of nowhere in like the Faroe Islands, or I don't know how to say that, Faroe Islands, or the Outer Hebrides somewhere, just on top of a mountain, on top of a cliff.
I said this year was going to be my year that I went to Scotland, because I've never been to Scotland, which is ridiculous, and I will go. I'm going to go next year, definitely. Instead of
I've only been to Edinburgh, so almost in the same boat.
Yeah, I've only been to Ireland once, which is even worse in a way. Oh, okay. First thing you would buy with the lottery jackpot?
Oh, it depends how much it was, doesn't it?
We'll go for a 10 million jackpot.
So the first thing I'd buy would be a house. Because, I'm not a homeowner. My husband and I rent, and we're just not in a situation to be able to afford to buy property in certainly in London, that's for sure, this part of the world. So the very first thing I'd buy is I would find a lovely house somewhere, not too big, a little garden, not too small either. but just right for two people and their cat, and a place for writing. Perhaps it would be by the sea, or perhaps it would be in the middle of the countryside, but I don't think it would be where I'm living now. I don't know, but yeah, I'd buy a house.
Yeah, I think I would too, actually. After, you know, a magnum of champagne, probably.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay, we've got time for one more quickie. This is a quick little one. What does this say? Oh, first book you can remember reading as a child.
Probably Millie Molly Mandy.
I remember Millie Molly Mandy, and it had the little map in the open page, didn't it, of all the different houses?
I think it was probably the first book I read, but probably the first book I read on my own, because I would have read that with my mum. The first book I read on my own was definitely The Banks of Plum Creek, which is part of the Little House on the Prairie.
I've been reading some of that to my goddaughter.
So On the Banks of Plum Creek was probably the first. It's a paperback. I still have it somewhere, and I think that's the first like paperback proper book that I ever read on my own, and I loved it. I was really obsessed with Laura Ingalls when I was a child. I had lots of obsessions: fairies, Laura Ingalls, and a bit of Mabel's with another one a bit later on. Yeah,
I don't think there's anything wrong with obsessions. Mine was ponies for a very long time.
Understandably. And then became David Bowie when I became a teenager, and that kind of lingers somewhat.
That's another good one, I said. You must love Labyrinth, because you've got the fairy and David Bowie. Greatest film ever. It came on the other day. It was just, I was channel flicking and it was on. I was like, well, that's it for 2 hours. I can't do anything else. I have to watch this film, even though I've seen it 100 times.
Oh, it's amazing. Look, I actually have some tiny little Labyrinth people
Oh, here. Amazing. Oh, so cute.
Even Toby's right there.
Yeah, little Tobes. Yeah. He's trouble, that baby.
Yeah, he really is.
If he'd just been quiet, none of this would have happened.
Yeah, no, it's always right.
Oh, well, thank you so much for coming along and telling us about your book and about you. And it's such a beautiful book. Hold it up again so everybody can have a look. Ooh. There you go. Perfect escapism. Escape into a fantastical world. And yeah, look at that. Woof.
Woohoo! Thank you so much.
So, thank you so much, and thanks everybody for watching, and come back next week for more exciting author chats. Goodbye everyone.